today's episode, we are bringing Madison onto the show. Madison was the girlfriend and the fiance of the real estate developer Niall Niami from around 2013 to around 2019.
He way overestimated what he would sell these for. No one was buying them even for what it cost to build them. When he got that loan, he was like, I'm getting an $80 million loan. This will either like work out or I'm going to be like a crazy homeless guy on the street. It was like really sad seeing like someone this cool go to the way he was in that Michael interview or the way he was the last time we talked.
For anybody who doesn't know the backstory here, Niall was one of the biggest and eventually one of the most notorious residential real estate developers in LA during this time frame. He's responsible for some of the biggest, the most elaborate, and some of the most outlandish mega mansions built around Beverly Hills and Bel Air. And Madison, who we're talking with today, she was by Niall's side for the development of basically every one of the most epic projects that he took on during his development career, including the infamous home at 944 Aurora that eventually sold at bankruptcy auction for $141 million. You could practically make a movie based on this chapter of her life, so I think you guys are going to enjoy today's episode. Let's bring her on. I know like right around 2010, 11, 12 is where this all began. So let's go back to there. Like what initially got you into this whole real estate scene in LA? Like when did you initially meet Niall?
So around 2013 is when I got into like the LA real estate thing. I was working at a hair salon in Beverly Hills. I'd been working there for about 2 months. Like I started in August and then in October, Niall came in. He's a big real estate developer. I didn't know at that time, but I called him over to our chair because we were going to do his hair. And then he picked up one of the architecture magazines, like LA real estate magazines. And he just started pointing to all these houses, like this house is mine, this house is mine, all these fucking houses are mine. So I was like, oh, cool. What do you do? And he's like, oh, I'm a real estate developer. And I have this house that's coming up for sale and we're asking $65 million for it. And it has a hair salon in it. And I'm doing this open house and I want girls to stand in the hair salon and make it like a functioning, like blow dry bar kind of vibe. Could you and one of your friends like work in this? Like it'll be in like a week or two. So I was like, oh, that's cool. Okay, sure.
Can you imagine this being your first open house? Like this place had synchronized swimmers, there was a chef, there was a DJ, there was models, there's an operating room in this house. Madison was paid $300 to stand in the hair salon for the night and style people's hair.
So I was talking and mixing and mingling with all these people. And like I had my business cards there, so it was a good crowd to like grow my hair business also. But at first, me and my friend, like we'd never seen a house like this big, this crazy. Like it was really something and it was really beautiful. Like it was all Fendi furniture and like really unique. Like some of the walls were mirrored in this like dark glass. But when we walked in, we were asking Niall as he was showing us around, we're like, who's gonna buy this? Like Gwen Stefani, like we were naming off all these celebrities. And he was like, what? No, like no celebrity could afford this. It's probably gonna be someone like you've never heard of, like that rich. We're like, whoa, that's crazy.
Next, I asked Madison just kind of how things unfolded from here. Like, how did she go from getting a relatively small job styling hair at an open house to next thing you know, she's dating one of the biggest residential real estate developers in the world?
Me and my hair friend, Ashley, we were like, okay, bye, Niall. We're gonna go. Like it was our time to leave. It was maybe like 10 or something. And he's like, no, you guys aren't going anywhere. Like, get a drink, stay until everyone else leaves. And then me and like a few other friends are gonna like stay here and party. And me and Ashley were like, okay. So we stayed afterwards. We were like drinking Cristal, playing around in the hair salon. We were like washing these guys' hair, cutting these guys' hair, curling the models' hair, like making friends with these people. And we're like, well, this is cool. This is fun. We'd been there for a while and we had to work the next day. Like, I think the next day was probably Saturday. The party was probably on a Friday. So we left and then the next morning I couldn't find my phone, but like I wasn't really concerned. I had a lot of clients. And then I got a call from the front desk up to the where I was and they're like, "Hey Madison, you have a call." Like, okay. And it was Niall.
Obviously, Niall needs to get the phone back to Madison. They link up and they start developing a friendship. And it's at this point that Madison starts to gain some more insight into what's going on with these big real estate projects.
When he was selling 271 Mapleton, the house with the operating room. He was living at the house that Puff Daddy bought right next door, but he was living there with his wife and his kids.
Before we move on from the Puff Daddy house, then, do you know, are there actually tunnels under the house?
As far as I know,
I
I'm
have
gonna
to
say
ask.
no. But I do know maybe where like a spark of that rumor could have come from is Niall built that house specifically to like raise his kids and family in. So they had a spa, but they had a water slide that went like under the water and it was a tube. And Niall said it was really dangerous and one kid like broke his arm on it and it was a big liability. So he thinks that Puff Daddy probably like closed off the pool slide. So that's the only thing that I can think of that would have like made sense is like where a tunnel rumor could come from. But like the Playboy Mansion, it wasn't functioning like the party place at that point that Puff Daddy was living there. So I'm gonna say that one's false.
I had to ask about the tunnels, you guys. I mean, there's all these news outlets who have been talking about how there was supposedly a tunnel that went from the Diddy mansion over to the Playboy mansion. And you're talking with somebody who actually spent time at this house and someone who spent time with the guy who built this house. You got to ask. Your involvement in these real estate deals is what fascinated me the most. Like you started getting really into them and kind of being by his side throughout the entire process of these builds, right?
I was super involved in Aurora, Londonderry, St. Ives, Stonebridge, Bellagio, and Carcassonne. Our first year, we were mostly just friends, and then I ended up living with him for like 6 years about. So that's when we became like more official, and I started really helping out with all the real estate projects because we were together pretty much all the time.
When Madison moved in and started helping out with all the real estate stuff, Niall was kind of ramping up to the peak of his real estate development career in LA. He had like 9 or 10 projects going on at this point, which could have made it kind of confusing for this video. So what I did next was I pulled up a graphic that kind of outlined all of the projects that he was working on at this time. The graphic looks like this. The dollar figures that you see on top represent what the houses eventually sold for.
A roll, the one for
Yeah.
141 million. He had mentioned that the first time that I met him because he's talking about his real estate and he's like, yeah, so I just bought this plot of land and like it's going to be a massive house. It's going to be the biggest house I've ever done. So when I first met him, he had just bought the plot of land for a roll. And I don't think they'd done anything with it. Like I think it was still like a mountain top. And then that one ended up just getting bigger and bigger. Like he wasn't planning on that exactly. His architect or whoever was in charge of like the base plans said, hey, you can make this into a super big spot if you just cut down the top of the mountain. So this was like a progression, like progressing always bigger and bigger. So they cut down the top of the mountain and then they're like, oh my gosh, it's actually really huge. Like you could fit multiple houses or one house. The house ended up being 105,000 square feet. That's bigger than the White House. And it had a guest
Yeah.
house that was like the size of a big house, maybe like 10,000 or something around there square feet of a guest house. So I met him right when he started that. And then I became involved with helping with that project probably like a year down the line. Like once we lived together, then he was always like asking for people's like creative ideas, any ideas, some crazy room, some crazy treatment they'd heard of.
It's totally normal to make changes in the field when you're building a house, but what we're talking about here is Niall making changes that would lead to new engineering requirements or new mechanical layouts or new electrical plans. You know, like imagine having a room that was just designed and permitted to be a bedroom, but then all of a sudden you want to convert that bedroom into a big fish tank full of sharks. That's not exactly a simple field change. It's kind of a big deal. The original plan was not to build a 105,000 square foot house there.
No, that just happened down the line. They knew it was a good piece. Like he knew it was going to be like his biggest thing to date, even when it was just top of a mountain before they cut it down. So it was always going to be big. And then once they decided that they could fully cut it down and then they did cut it down, then it became like even more behemoth. And then since they could do such a big thing, then they went all out with all like the craziest ideas, like all these bedrooms, all these parking spaces, the bowling alley, the spa. So it just became bigger and bigger. And then once it's so big and already built, you have all these extra rooms. So you have to come up with something more crazy.
A big question for me at this point is exactly who is Niall even building these houses for? Like when you're building a $10 million spec home in LA, you're gonna have like 1,000 potential buyers for that house. But I was curious to hear what Madison's perspective was on what Niall's ideal client was for these over-the-top mega mansions.
At that point in time, he was really focused on Saudi buyers. So like Saudis bought the house that he was asking 65 million for. And they're like, the only problem is there's not enough room for our cars. There's not enough room for our staff. There's not enough room for all our people. And this is a big house. So his only complaint with all his houses is there's not enough room. So he's like, okay, guys, to all my buyers and future buyers, here's the house. If you want to have the 30-car garage, the 30 guest rooms, and like the staff quarters and all of this, here it is. Because there was never enough staff quarters or whatever. So this was the big house. And something happened. I think it was like when Trump got into office, something happened with the Saudis where they weren't coming to Beverly Hills as much as they used to. So that like kind of put a stop to his main buyer profile with the one.
Next, I asked Madison, like, where do you get the confidence to build something like the one? I could only assume that Niall got this confidence because he had success with other projects, the 2 houses on Mapleton, and then also that house on Hillcrest.
Yeah, he was hitting home runs like every house right before that. So like the banks loved him, the realtors loved him, the buyers loved him. And even before that, there were some really good houses he did in the Bird Streets, like that house that Jolo bought, the Malaysian scammer guy. He bought one of Niall's houses in the Bird Streets. He sold this other house to Tom Barrack in Brentwood, huge with like a basketball court, tons of money. So he was making like great deal after great deal. And so everyone had a lot of confidence in him. And like he had the buyers of these places saying, yeah, I just wish there was more and more and more. So then they're like, finally, this is going to be the one. Since they weren't going into it being like, we're going to sell this for 500 million, what they were asking for, like the confidence just kept growing and growing until it was something so big that they were all like, what the fuck?
Next, we pivot over to talking a little bit more about Londonderry, because this is the house that Madison spent the most time at and also contributed the most to in terms of the design.
Yeah, this one, I did a lot of super cool things in this one. Like I was equally involved in this and St. Ives and Stone Ridge, but this house is so cool. He'd had this one being built since about the same time as a roll started. And he always had plans of this one being like a bachelor pad style, because his previous ones had been like French contemporary or just like very modern, like white Bird Streets houses. So now since he'd had such a big portfolio, he was going to switch it up a little bit with this one. So there's a 2-story pool, like one pool on top of the other. And the top one has a see-through lucite bottom. So you can like see the people swimming. That had always been in the plans, like the ultimate bachelor pad.
My next question gets into these super specific, bespoke design decisions that were being made in this house and in other houses that he was doing at the time.
He was like, what are some ideas to make this like the ultimate pool house? So like I'm a yoga teacher. So I was like, you need to make a hot yoga room with all like living walls, all plant walls. Because when you breathe with the plants, like they get oxygen, you get oxygen. So in that one, we did a spa with a hot yoga room. And also the kitchen of this had like, it's called an urban cultivator. It's so cool. You can like grow all your sprouts.
All of you guys who have watched any of those house tours of Londonderry from back in the day, you'll remember that there is one room in here that was completely off limits. Niall called it the Red Room, but he didn't let cameras in, and neither did the future listing agents. So, of course, I had to ask Madison what that room was all about.
When I met him, I was reading 50 Shades of Grey, so I just assumed that like everyone with a cool house has like a secret red room in there. So I was like, when he was showing us around the Mapleton house, I'm like, cool. So like, where's the red room? Like this was when I was reading the book. He's like, what is that? Like, I've never heard of such a thing. Like,
Yeah.
seriously, that's not a thing. So then years down the line, like it'd still like be like in my mind. And then he came up to me in Londonderry and he's like, look, so there's this little tiny corner in Londonderry that's not being used. Like if you want, you can design a red room in there. I was like, oh, cool. So I fully designed this red room. I did like red leather padded walls with like these cool like gunmetal black studs in them and like sconces that kind of look like candle wax gripping, and has like this kind of mirrored ceiling, but like black mirror, so it's not that bright.
Next, let's change gears and talk about the architect behind these homes, Paul McLean.
I think him with Niall was probably a good mix because he'll throw in some crazy shit and Niall will go for it. But Niall was like, yeah, man, you really have to watch Paul McLean. He'll put in some crazy shit. Because I think their goal was to sell like the most expensive houses. So like I think it was Paul McLean's idea to do like the 2-story swimming pool with a clear bottom. So like they wanted to sell big houses, not just like some house in the West Hollywood Hills.
If you're a luxury real estate developer in LA, oftentimes you're going to turn into kind of like a mini celebrity. You see that to this day with other developers like Rompton Ray Nosrati, for example. Because of this, Madison had encounters with quite a few celebrities as they showed interest in buying one of Niles' houses.
Like one day he just called me, he's like, hey, come over to Crescent, like Floyd's looking at it. So I went over there And there's all these like Rolls Royces, all the same color, were parked in front. And then like all of Floyd's crew was there, like on the couches, on like the stools, like just texting, not even looking up at me, just like on their phones chilling. And like I walked in the door and Niall and Floyd were standing there like far across the hallway. And like Floyd caught a glance at me out of the corner of his eye and he like walked towards me. Like it felt like a shark was like swimming towards me. I was like, oh my God. Like he did not like lose eye contact. And he's like, hey, I'm Floyd. Like, hi, I'm Madison. And we were just like talking. And then we went into the movie theater of that house. And I was like, oh, like we watched your last fight in this movie theater. He's like, yeah, everyone watches my fights. Like he was so cool. And Niall was so cool. And they're just like there. He's like, yeah, I can buy this house like after my fight. And then I was like, hey, give me tickets for the fight. So Floyd gave us tickets for the fight and then he bought the house after. Like these were like cool guys. It was like really sad seeing like someone this cool go to the way he was in that Michael interview or the way he was the last time we talked. Like it didn't make sense.
It's time that we get into where everything started to go south. It was at this point where Niall had all of these projects that were finished, but they were not selling. He was up to his eyeballs in debt. It was right around this time when we all saw that interview that he did with producer Michael on his YouTube channel. Here's what Madison had to say about this chapter.
We broke up in 2020, but I would say around like 2018, these houses were like really piling on. Like I think he had Hillcrest, St. Ives, Londonderry, Stonebridge, Bellagio, Carcassonne, Aurora. And no one was buying these.
This was around that time when Niles started to be a bit more in the public eye. He did the walkthrough of the one with producer Michael and then that sit-down interview that we were just talking about. Plus, he was posting a bunch of weird stuff on his Instagram, although all of those posts have since been deleted.
So he owned all of these houses. He built all of these houses. So he had like mortgages to pay, loans to pay. No one's buying them. And they're like super crazy expensive houses. So he's got like 6 of them at one time. And then to keep them going, like some are still being built, some are just sitting there vacant. But regardless, he has like high mortgages, like high trades to pay. So he needed to take out more loans than he was already in. He was already probably like $20 million in loans in debt, plus all the houses. And then to cover everything, to finish building a roll, to finish like all the expenses of all the houses, he needed an $80 million loan. So the only person that would do it was Don Hankey. So when he got that loan, he was like, I'm getting an $80 million loan. This will either like work out or I'm going to be like a crazy homeless guy on the street. But like if I'm fucked, then I'm not going to be able to like make it back again like I have before. So he was like stuck. It wasn't like he really like wanted to do this, but like everything was going to get foreclosed on. Everyone was going to lose all their money. He wouldn't be able to pay the trades, or he could get this massive loan and keep like trying to sell these houses like the best he can. This is a really stressful thing. And he was like, no one can help me. Like most people's problems, like someone can help them. Like at the point he was in, $100 million of debt, no one buying these massive houses. Like no one can help him. So that was like an unbearable amount of stress that like he couldn't escape. And every single time he would see anyone like on the street, like, hey, Niall, did you sell any of those big houses? Or like when his kids got home from school, the first thing they'd say is like, hey, Dad, did you like sell any houses? Like my parents, anyone that he sees. So it's just like a lot of stress, ego, and just what is he gonna do? Like no one's buying them. So I think he just like broke, like mentally snapped, basically. It was about 2018, and then he started hanging out with like some random LA people because like he was always like a businessman, like a very strict like business person. He's not like around partying really. And then this point, like he like started hanging out with a different crowd of people that were partying a lot, like introducing him to like the LA like underworld. And he had all these big empty houses. So everyone's like, Niall's a billionaire, blah, blah, blah. Like he's in all of this debt. And he was like, everyone thinks I'm a billionaire. I'm all this money in debt. I have no money. Like, this is so bad. So then people started wanting to party at all these big houses and then attracting this kind of like trashy crowd. And then he started wanting to go to Burning Man. And this is a guy under immense stress, maybe one release, and then he just like completely like snapped and lost it. So I think it was easier for him to act like he's crazy than for him to be crazy. He was not acting like he really was like that crazy and that weird nonstop. So I think like instead of like being his normal self, he had to like break and like went this like weird way. He went to Burning Man and started like getting into the party lifestyle and just like kind of lost his mind. Like his lenders lost trust in him. Everyone was like, what is going on with this guy? I kind of thought he would like it was a phase, but he just kept with it.
As you could probably guess, it was all of this that eventually led to Madison and Niles splitting up.
I stopped talking to him. He wanted me to come over to party or something, and I had my own apartment. I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. And he freaked out. He's like, I'm going to ruin your life with no mercy. Like, this was in March 2020. Like, he was at the peak of his insanity. Like, I could not hang out with him. So I didn't talk to him for 3 days. And this is going to be a really, like, sad story. It's going to take, like, a weird twist for the worst, just a trigger warning. Um, he'd been partying with all of these people and I hadn't talked to him for 3 days. So like I thought he would just like be over his little partying thing and then call me because sometimes he would just like say something rude and then call me a few days later and say sorry. So he called me 3 days later and he's like, hey, what's up? He's like, Madison, I don't want to call you right now because I fucking hate you. But Lauren died. Lauren was my best friend since 8th grade. I thought he was like hallucinating on something. I was like, what are you talking about? What? And he was like, I guess he got a text from Lauren's mom saying like he was one of the last texts on her phone and she'd taken a shower to get ready to go over to his house. He was having all these house parties and she'd passed away in the shower. I never talked to him ever again. Like I'd been like the stepmom to his kids for 7 years. Like I'd helped him design all these houses. Like I just like sold my car, I sold my engagement ring, and I just like went and moved to Mexico for like 6 months and like just like refigured out my whole life because I was like, what the hell just happened? Like it was really tragic and really sad. But yeah, he and then 2 months later he did that insane interview on that Michael thing. It's like he like completely snapped. Like that was not the Niall like I ever knew or that I ever would be with. Like there was something wrong. So that's how we ended.
Honestly, brutal. Like, what an unbearably sad situation. I really don't even know what else to say. On a lighter note, at the end here, I asked Madison what she's up to nowadays, whether or not she's still dabbling in real estate or what she's doing now.
No, I'm not in real estate really at all. Sometimes I'll like dabble in some little interior design things, but nothing like that. So I have an online swimwear biz. It's called Daydream Swim. They're all ethically produced. Right now they're made in Bali and they're all really versatile. Like you can do yoga in them or go to some pool party or wear them as outside clothes too.
That's a wrap for today's episode, you guys. Thanks to Madison for coming onto the show. Make sure to show her some love down in the comments, and I'll link to her Instagram and her YouTube channel down there as well. You can go check that out. According to YouTube, I don't have a huge percentage of women who watch my channel, but I'll link to Madison's swimwear brand down below as well for any of you guys who wants to check that out too. I don't know what it is. It felt like this whole story with the one ended a couple of years ago, but there's still these stories that continue to trickle in, and as they do, I'm going to continue to share updates with you guys because I know a lot of you guys originally came to the channel for those videos. I hope you enjoyed this one. A little bit of a different format, but I had fun with it. I'll see you guys next week.